Good morning, it's Manager Critic Monday. Those of you new to the page or the channel, this is all about just checking in with yourself and just listening to that inner voice. You know, maybe it's been external, maybe you've been very verbalizing, you've been criticizing yourself or somebody else or your situation or whatever's going on for you. And it's an opportunity for you just to check in. And so we're going to finish the call, the video today with the clean setup questions, which will be: what would you like to happen this week? How do you need to be, and what kind of resource or support might you need? But in the meantime, I want to just sort of share some of the things that have been going on for me and some of my clients, and some of the things that we're exploring at Step by Step Listening this week, which I hope will inspire you to manage your critic and do more of what you love and ditch the critic that says you can't. So for those of you watching me on Facebook will know that I went to London yesterday. I was invited by a friend of mine, Janella, whose husband and herself were exhibiting at the other art fair, and one of the things that Mark and I had missed through the COVID was going to art galleries and having some conversations about those kinds of things. So we decided that it was time to have a go at stepping out and having a go at doing some different things. And so we were thinking about, the questions I needed to ask myself was, for the day to be just the way I'd like it to be, it would be like what? And it needed to be relaxed and fun, and it had to be safe. I needed to know that we'd taken as much precaution as we could. So we had our hand gel, we had our face masks, and we took packed lunch, and we had one meal out. So we reduced the risk. However, yesterday I must have checked into more venues with the NHS code than I have done in one day, in more than I've done in the last 6 months. And whilst it was all great during the day, what we did notice when we were coming home, I was going like, oh my God, the impact's going to be that if any one of those places send us a message to say somebody that was in that building at the same time we were has been identified with COVID, we are going to have to self-isolate for 10 days. And so it started to really get me thinking about the fact that we have a family barbecue on Saturday. So we all need to make sure we've tested ourselves, that we make sure that we're okay. But in accordance with the rules is, once we get notified, we need to be in isolation for 10 days. And because it's less than 10 days, that's now going to impact whether or not we can or can't go. So some of the questions that are really good questions to ask yourself is the impact of something, but also to think beyond that. So one of the things that we were now thinking is, oh my gosh, we've paid to go to F1 on the 15th of July. So actually we need to, if after having taken that risk, we've really got 10 days, and we're like, actually, if we get anything now, that also means the fitter he's now in 10 days isolation. And when he's able to come back to finish off the downstairs shower, we won't be able to do that. So some of the questions that we have to ask ourselves are about actually thinking, what do you want to have happen? And then noticing what time frame that you're considering that over. But also some of the things that we have a responsibility for as the questioner and of ourselves or other people is knowing where that puts your attention. So yesterday, the very first thing we had to do is put our masks on to stand on the platform of the train station, and we had to have the masks on the train. And what I realised, it was the longest I'd had to wear a mask, because I've only gone in to sort of do the Asda shopping for an hour, and that's the only time I've really had to wear masks or popped into my little shop down the road to post some postage. I haven't really had to wear my mask for any length of time. And as we were walking over the bridge yesterday, there was a moment when I actually couldn't breathe, and I really started to I could feel myself panicking, and luckily I just took the mask off a little bit and just gave myself a moment to come to. And in that moment I said to Mark, it's the first time perhaps I've fully appreciated that those with asthma or breathing difficulties beforehand, and if you're nervous, just how difficult it was. And it was quite humid, and there was lots of things that were impacting it that was actually causing my finding it difficult to breathe. Because I know about the questions to ask, I was able to just basically not focus on anybody else, just come back into myself and just calm my breathing down and be okay with it. But it did mean for the next few minutes, I just said to Mark, just give me a minute, I just need to acclimatise. And he said, well, if it's any consolation, he says, I'm finding it quite hard to breathe in my mask too. So why am I telling you all of this? It's because when we ask people questions, we have no idea what it's going to trigger for them. I had no idea yesterday that as I went over the bridge, I was going to have this moment where I felt, panicky and I couldn't breathe. Now, it is just a moment. It hasn't consumed my day. I've moved on. There were many moments through that day where I started to notice and start to think about the impact of having gone to so many places and been around so many people in a day. The questions I was doing would have put me into a place of panic. It would have put me into a place of not really enjoying the moment. And so I chose to ask myself a question that would bring me back to what's working about this day, what's working about being out with these people. And so what was lovely was to meet artists and talk about their work and to find out where their inspiration came from and how long it took them to paint these pieces of. And there was one lady, it took her 2 months, like working on it every day for 2 months for this piece of work to be produced, and it was just phenomenal. And somebody else was painting with cement. So those questions were coming from a place of curiosity and wanting to be present and connected with these people in the moment. So one of the things we do on the Motivate or Manage, you can't actually read that because there's a logo on the top of there, isn't it? I've just realised that's not going to help you very much. If I take that off, Motivate, Manage or Mentor is up there. We talk about that we're on the module 6 this week, and we're going to be talking about how to ask good questions. And the reason this course came about was because my clients were often criticising themselves, saying, I don't know how to ask good questions. And particularly, they were comparing and contrasting themselves with me. What they were forgetting was that I had done 12 days training and I'd been on that course 3 times. So the first time I went, I did the first training course. The second time I went again, I went as an assistant. Second time I went as an assistant. But all the time you go, even if you're an assistant, you have to be a participant and you're practicing and you're observing. So you get to see the whole process. So I've done 36 days of in-depth training. I'd attended practice sessions every single month for the first 5 or 6 years that I was training as a professional coach. I've also trained, I still train now. So last year in the COVID, when I had to relearn how to do my group facilitation online, I went and did another 4 hours of training every single week for 8 weeks. So people are often comparing and contrasting themselves to me as a trained facilitator with the questions. So I started getting curious, actually, what was it that makes a good question? And quite often, people were defining a good question based on whether the other person could answer it. And they would also define themselves as being, not very good or not very smart if they couldn't answer it. Now, in my work, when you come from a place of curiosity, a really good question leaves somebody completely stumped. They go, do you know what? I don't know the answer to that. And the reason why they define it in that moment as a good question is because it's now taken them into new territory. So if I'd asked them a question they already knew the answer to, then that's a reminder, that's great. But in the work that I do, often what's defining a good question is when people get to a question asked and they don't actually know the answer to it. Now, if you lack confidence in yourself, and you are asked questions and you have a story, your critic tells you, well, you ought to know this is about you, how come you don't know what you're like, or how come you don't know the answer to that, or you ought to know the answer to that, then actually when you get a question you don't know the answer to, if your critic is going, but you ought to, you should do, then you might, instead of thinking, God, that's a really good question, I don't know the answer to that, I wonder what that means to me, you wouldn't be in that space of curiosity. Instead, you'd be in that place of criticizing yourself about not knowing and not being able to come up with the answer quickly enough. So one of the things that we do is we play around with questions and we play around with different framings, different structure of questions, whether we use clean questions or conversational questions. We also play around with how fast they're asked. One of the things that can happen when we're asking questions is if it's coming from a place of curiosity, you're more likely to deliver the question like, so how did you get that texture? It was one of the questions I was asking, and the guy said, I mixed cement in my paint. I was like, wow, didn't expect that. So the question is coming, it's got a lightness to it, there's a curiosity to it. If you are lacking confidence and you're asking a question maybe because you think they're getting something wrong, or you're holding them in contempt, you're criticising yourself, you're criticising somebody else. There's a really good chance that when you deliver the question, you'll go, why are you doing that? And it might be fast. There's that tone about it. So it's not even, why are you doing that? I'm not even sure I can do it the why with curiosity, but, the way that you ask a question will determine whether it lands. So if you're watching on record, if I said to you today, what would you like to have happen? You could notice how you receive that question. How does it impact you? If I slow it down and say, what would you like to have happen? Or what would you like to have happen? And you notice how those different questions land. So some of the things we're going to be practicing this week on Motivate, Manage or Mentor will be about how fast we deliver the question, what's the purpose of the question, what was the reason for asking the question, what was the information we're hoping to gain. And for me, a great question is a question that you don't know the answer to. You're not asking a question to make the other person see what you already know. If you know something and you're trying to get someone to see it, it can feel a bit false, and it can feel like every time they answer, you don't like their answer. So everything, their experience then isn't honoured, it isn't respected, it isn't valued, because what you're trying to do is get them to answer, to give you the answer that you want, the one that you think should be right. And sadly, that is how we've been trained. As young children and at school, we're taught something and then we're asked questions to test our understanding. And that is one form of questioning. That is a way of getting information to clarify whether you've heard and understood what's been said. But it isn't the form of questioning that's going to help you get to know, like, and trust yourself, or get to know, like, and trust other people. If your only purpose for asking questions is to direct people's attention on what you know, what's in your head that's invisible to them right now, and it's a testing process to see if they get it, then they're often going to find that their experience isn't honoured, that their responses aren't validated, they're not respected or valued, and that can knock people's confidence. I'm feeling like I've gone round a little bit today, but I'm hoping that's of use to you. So the question for you today is, how do you know when you've asked a good question? And how do you know when you've been asked one? So when you're asking them, how do you know it's a good question? What do you hear and see from the other person that tells you it's a good question? And when you're being asked a good question, how do you know it's a good question? Wanting to be seen as good enough or capable will want to be able to answer questions really quickly and efficiently and would want to know the responses straight away. Whereas somebody who perhaps is more confident and recognises that questions in that situation is about evolving, about learning more and being curious, will actually be fascinated by the fact they don't know. So with that in mind, let me leave you with the questions for this week. What would you like to have happen this week? I'd love to know your responses. Please comment below. How do you need to be for that to happen? And what kind of resource or support might you need? So just to remind you, we're here to support you. I'm looking forward to this week's session with the Academy members, where we're looking at how to ask good questions and practicing how fast or how slow we deliver them, and getting feedback from the other person about whether they land or don't land. And we're going to find out what kind of questions, is there any patterns, is it the way the question's structured, or is it the way the question is delivered, or the intention behind it that has the biggest impact. So I can't wait to find out that. I'd love to know what's going on in your world. Please share. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.